I'm starting the recording. So we will start the class now. We are going to discuss oligomerization and polymerization. This is a huge topic and it cannot be covered in a single hour, but I'm just going to give you a flavor for what is involved in this topic. And if you're interested, you would have to read a little more and find out for yourself. But the principles that are involved in this are already covered. Quite a bit of it is something that we have seen earlier, and so you will not have any new principles being introduced in this lecture. So it should be easy for you to follow. So I start off with this title slide where I have indicated that it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. What that means is that if you make an incremental change, if you are able to make a new catalyst which will change the efficiency of the process by 0.5%, you will be a billionaire. So the stakes are enormous and people are working extensively on these reactions. But it is very difficult to make significant progress. It's all heavily patented. Some of the things you might never get to know really what is involved, but there is significant amount published in the literature. So we will start with this. I want to start in a very systematic fashion from the molecular point of view. So I start with oligomerizations. How can we combine two olefins to produce a longer chain? So this is something that we have seen in a couple of cases. For example, the cobalt catalyzed trimerization of acetylenes, and that involved sometimes you can mix dienes and you can combine enes and so on. So it is possible to oxidatively couple two alkenes to generate a new compound. And this oxidative coupling was in fact accidentally found out by none other than Ziegler. And if I tell you this, this should not give you the impression that if you use, if you are careless in your research, you will make great progress. Because what happened was a PhD student took a reaction vessel, an autoclave, which was not properly washed, and he or she did a polymerization reaction. I don't know the identity of the student. I have not read the original papers, but the story goes that a catalyst that was used in the previous reaction was a contaminant in the Ziegler study of the off-Bohr reaction. Off-Bohr reaction, if you remember, is the building up of alkenes to form long chain polyols. And during this process, because there was nickel as a contaminant, it ended up in pure dimerization of of ethylene. So that gives you C2H, dimerization of C2H4, that gives you butene. And so this led to some study, and it was soon shown that if you use nickel as a catalyst under some of the reducing conditions, you remember that the Aufbau reaction used aluminum alkyls. So aluminum alkyls are reducing, and nickel 2 plus, if you add, it will get quickly reduced to nickel 0. And this nickel 0 can do oxidative coupling the way in which I have written it out here. Two ethylenes can do oxidative coupling, so that it will give you a metallocyclopentane. This is a metallocyclopentane, and this metallocyclopentane has got a beta hydrogen which can do elimination, a reductive, reverse of a migratory insertion reaction. So that will give you an alkene and a metal hydride. So that is pictured here. All the arrows are drawn already. I do not want to redo that, but that will give you a metal hydride. Reverse of migratory insertion reaction, right? So if you did a migratory insertion reaction here, you would end up with this. In fact, all these reactions are in fact reversible, and there is no reason why the reaction should stop here, but it does. Nickel has a preponderance or a propensity to do this beta hydride elimination when you have two alkenes coordinated or two alkenes oxidatively coupled. So it invariably leads to dimerization of ethylene to give you butene. So that was a single product obtained as opposed to the long chain system that they were expecting, and so it was dubbed the nickel effect. So anytime you have a surprising result, you better go and examine exactly what caused it. Sometimes it could be a simple impurity. So this beta hydrogen transfer can stop the reaction, and if it doesn't stop the reaction, you can actually have polymerization. So they ended up looking at other metals, and soon they found out that if you used group 4 transition metals, you can make polymers. And the whole area of Ziegler developed this whole area of polymerization. And as you know, polymers, once people got into polymers, it was very difficult to get out of. Even now we are struggling with ways and means by which we can reduce our dependence on polymers. In spite of all our best efforts, we still end up using polymers because they are the most efficient means by which we can carry out several tasks, including housing our phones. So they are used in making polyethylene sheets, plasticizers, detergents, lubricants, you name it, you have polymers everywhere. Interestingly, if I change the metal from nickel to chromium, just nickel to chromium, that is 2 steps backward in the periodic table, you end up with, that's not 2 steps, that is 4 steps backward in the periodic table. So cobalt, iron, manganese and chromium, and then you end up with trimerization. So the way I remember this is by nickel is D10 and that is D6, so I can accommodate another 4 electrons. So another 2 ethylenes are added on. Today we have a particularly large number of heavy vehicles going by this road. I apologize for this, but this is the best place for me to give the lecture. So, okay. So, chromium promotes trimerization. But the reaction mechanism is supposed to be the same. You have combination of 3 oxidative coupling and then insertion of one more molecule of ethylene, which leads to metallocycloheptane, and this metallocycloheptane does a beta hydride elimination. Now, exactly why? Because this is done like a black box. In fact, many of these reactions are almost they can start with homogeneous catalysts, but they are heterogeneous in nature sometimes, and they are better done in a heterogeneous fashion, because at the end of the reaction, it sometimes is easier to do the separation if you have a heterogeneous catalyst. So let's move on. So catalytic trimerization of ethylene with cyclopentadienyl arene titanium catalyst. This is the title of a paper which does this trimerization. But notice what is happening here. This is a molecular catalyst now. And like I said, many of the previous catalysts that I've told you, although they start with homogeneous systems, during the course of the reaction, there is some heterogenization involved, and people do not know the actual nature of the catalyst. So there is a lot of emphasis or a lot of enthusiasm to figure out, can we make a homogeneous catalyst system so that we have what is called a single site catalysis. So what happens in a heterogeneous catalyst is that the catalyst has got multiple sites, and the selectivity of each site is slightly different from the other. Like for example, there can be steps involved in a crystal lattice, there can be edge defects, there can be corners of a cube. That was not what I meant. There can be corners of a cube. So there can be different types of, this can be the active site, this can be the active site as a step. And so it's important to have a single site catalyst so that you can understand and also have better selectivity for a single type of a reaction. So here is a titanium catalyst, and the titanium catalyst was generated starting with titanium tetrachloride, but with replacement of one cyclopentadienyl group with, one chlorine with a cyclopentadienyl group, and the cyclopentadienyl group had a pendant aromatic ring system, and that can coordinate to the titanium once these 3 chlorines are removed. How do you remove these 3 chlorines? You use something called MAO. MAO is methyl alumoxane. I'll come to the structure in a minute. Methyl alumoxane. And actually it is aluminum with oxygen and methyl in it. So it is a polymeric species, and its structure itself is heterogeneous, but the species it generates is supposedly something like this, where you have a titanium which is not coordinated. I'll tell you why it's not coordinated with anything else. So it's highly reactive. So these sites are available for coordination by the olefin. Now, 1000 equivalents of MAO are used. Now, that is a non-stoichiometric amount. You can use 900, you can use 1000, you can use 1100. It doesn't matter, but a huge amount of MAO is used. So the question, so there is, in a sense, we have got a single site catalyst, but then we have lost the molecular explanation to a certain degree. So there is a lot of effort now to replace methyl allomoxane with something that we can understand. But what is this methyl allomoxane? Like I said, it has got one methyl aluminum, and so this is a repeat unit. So you have another oxygen coordinating to the aluminum. So you have a species something like this, which is polymeric. The ratio of methyl to aluminum is approximately 1:1. So this species can take up a lot of Lewis bases. So any X minus that comes can coordinate to this aluminum. So it is a sponge for any Lewis acid, any Lewis base, including traces of moisture or an oxygen, reduced oxygen. It will just remove every species which has got a Lewis pair of electrons. As a result, the titanium is left uncoordinated. That is why I said that you have this vacant coordination site on titanium. And the only thing that the titanium gets its hold on is the olefin. So it activates the olefin and makes it very reactive. I have mentioned, I think, everything that is there on this slide. The last thing that I forgot to mention is that because methyl allomoxane is a polymeric material, the charge is distributed. So you can add X minus, and the X minus is just, the X minus is just distributed all over this polymeric species. So here is a bracket that I wanted to highlight. So this whole thing is a repeat unit, but you have X minus, which can be in any portion of this long chain. And because it is such a large anion and the charge is distributed, it is not coordinating. There is a lot of controversy about this not coordinating business, but I will show you a couple of structures now. Generally, the larger the anion, the less coordinating it seems to be. So it's not an unreasonable point, but there are weak interactions between the anion and the cation usually. So when you have a large anion, you make large bulky cations more stable. That is also generally true. So let's rewrite the structure now with the titanium catalyst, and let's take a look at what could happen. This does selective trimerization. Like I said, that's the reason why this is called a single site catalyst, because this does selective trimerization close to 97%. If I remember right, in that previous slide, you had this information. You close to have 97% of trimerization. And nickel, a similar effect of getting a very large proportion of butene. You don't get hexene. So you know that these are molecules which have been activated and are kept in a particular having a particular structure which is conducive for producing only one type of a reaction. And the surprising thing is such a subtle change between chromium and nickel has a profound effect of having either trimerization or dimerization. As I told you, MAV is important as a reducing agent. Okay, it has got this methyl aluminum bond, and methyl aluminum can be reducing, and that is something that we have already seen. It can do transmetallation. So the titanium trichlorides could be converted into titanium trimethyls, and this titanium trimethyls can eliminate ethane and produce titanium methyl groups. And titanium methyl groups can also initiate, titanium methyl groups can now initiate the polymerization by forming a titanium alkyl insertion reaction first an insertion reaction, and then a subsequent coordination site is generated for the olefin, which will keep proceeding. So very often with MAO is now become an integral part of the polymer industry, and people use it for activating polymerization catalysts also. What I have shown you in the first two slides, or in the first two reactions, is a case where they have used it for the dimerization and the trimerization reactions. Tetramerization has proven to be a lot more difficult, and avoiding MAO is also extremely difficult, and that has been heavily, like I said, heavily researched. Here is a paper which uses 10 equivalents of AlMe3, and it's seen as a breakthrough. Okay, it is seen as a breakthrough in the oligomerization of ethylene. So this is the state of affairs right now. I will give you references to other papers also, but these are recent papers that have been published in selective ethylene oligomerization. So here is a paper where they've used 10 equivalents of AlMe3 as an activating agent, and you look at the difference between MAO and what trimethyl aluminum can do. The productivity or the turnover frequency of the same catalyst activated by AlMe3 is 25,010. Whereas if I use MAO, if I use MAO in the reaction, you get 53,540. The recycled catalyst in these cases reduces in its activity, and that is quite common, but this is a fairly common feature, but that tells you how efficient the catalyst is. But this is a very large number. This productivity per gram of, or per mole of the catalyst, you have 41,280 times ethylene moles are converted into the hexene and octene. And also you notice that the selectivity is incredibly high. You get 95:4 of hexene is to octene. Tetramerization, this is tetramerization, is happening, but to a small extent. So still, chromium versus nickel, it's still a surprise to me, and chromium generates hexene. The way I remember, just keep it in mind that chromium is associated with benzene, bis-benzene chromium, so I take it as a trimerization catalyst. Okay, that's got nothing to do with the mechanism. So here is the structure of a complex that they isolated from the reaction mixture. I want to tell you one more thing about this whole paper. This whole paper illustrates how important it is to study the catalysis carefully. What they have shown is that you can, after the end of the reaction mixture, they could isolate this catalyst. So here is this catalyst which has got a fluorinated alkoxy compound as an anion, as a counter anion. And this counter anion, like I told you in a previous slide, that is separate from the cationic species. So this is a cationic species, and it is this large species which is present here. This is the large species, large cation. And the anion is found separately, not interacting with the cationic species. And this was the hypothesis to start with, that the large anion will not be able to approach the transition metal, which is actually functioning as a catalyst, and olefins would be capable of interacting with the transition metal and carrying out the oligomerization. And interestingly, if you add MAO, this regenerates a catalyst. This itself is not a catalyst. This isolated compound, isolated species is not a catalyst. Okay, it does not catalyze trimerization, but you can regenerate it. So the reason why I'm saying that is that even if you have this large anion which is not really interacting with the chromium, that seems to deactivate the catalyst. If I add MAO, then I seem to be regenerating it. It's also possible that MAO merely generates a chromium methyl compound which can initiate the catalysis and promote it, and in this form the chromium is kind of deactivated by the presence of this ether. Although I don't understand how the simple addition of MAO, other than the fact that MAO has got Me minus equivalents. It's a hidden methyl anion, a masked methyl anion, masked R minus species. And this masked R minus is capable of displacing this ether group which is protecting the chromium from carrying out the reaction. Okay, so the general explanation that you find in many of these cases is that the tendency to trimerize is because six-membered rings bring C1 close to the metal again. I find that difficult to believe because nickel does it in the second step itself. If you see the catalytic cycle, at any step after the first insertion of the alkene, you can have beta hydride elimination. Beta hydride elimination could have happened at any step, but in the case of chromium, it happens after 3 ethylenes are stitched up. In the case of nickel, it happens after the second ethylene is stitched up. That's the place when you have a saturated hydrogen available for the metal to do beta hydrogen elimination or a reverse migratory insertion. So tetramerization, like I said, has been a challenge, and this is a paper that appeared in 2004, which claimed that they have a new route to produce 1-octene with exceptionally high selectivity. Now, the interesting thing about this is this is also a chromium paper. And the active metal is chromium. And if you remember right, the previous case also they used PNP ligands. There is something about the PNP ligand which has a fairly acute bite angle. This I'm talking about the way in which it binds to the metal that seems to be capable of generating the chromium, the active site on the chromium. But here also they have used MAO. Here they have used only 300 equivalents, so that's pretty good, but still you have to use a large amount. And the ligand also is fairly simple. This is a ligand which I should mention that it is a ligand which is quite commonly used even in this department. It used to be quite popular. Professor S.S. Krishnamurthy, who is retired now, is a person who has developed a lot of PNP ligands. Okay, so this ligand in combination with MAO is capable of tetramerization of ethylene. A small amount of polyethylene is also formed. Okay, a small amount of polyethylene is formed in this. But you see the selectivity difference between DPPE, which is PCH2CH2P, PH. The only difference between the two, PNP, PH, the two is the fact that you have one atom less but I should not overlook the fact that this nitrogen has got a lone pair which is partially delocalized with this phosphorus. So you do have a little bit of population of the phosphorus higher lying orbitals or the sigma star orbitals, resulting in a different coordination geometry for coordination behavior for the phosphorus in DPPA. DPPA is a phosphinoamine, bis diphenyl phosphinoamine, and the DPPE, which is the diphenyl phosphinoethane. Okay. So a lot of variations have been tried. In fact, the moment somebody finds out every other tweaking of the ligand is done in order to improve the catalysis, in order to discover a different selectivity, etc. These have been done. So I will skip this. Simple dimerization of dienes is also known with cobalt ACAC, and that also is an interesting reaction. But now I'll come to polymerization itself. Polymerization, there is a lot of interesting stories in it, because Ziegler and Natta received the Nobel Prize for their discovery of these polymerization reactions. And there was, just like I explained to you about Negishi and Suzuki, Ziegler was the first person who invented this reaction, and but Natta made a remarkable discovery and expanded the scope, which resulted in him also being recognized for the Nobel Prize. This resulted in a lot of bitterness between Ziegler and Natta, but those are all human problems. Polyethylene and polypropylene are still made using Ziegler-Natta catalysts and modifications. One of the important modifications is the fact that these are, the catalysts are titanium or zirconium. They are suspended or supported. There's a better word. They are supported on magnesium chloride. And people have found that if you use MAV again, you will get fantastic results, meaning that the catalyst loading that you use per gram of polyethylene is minuscule. In fact, the catalyst is never recovered in these reactions because the turnover number is so very large. So people never recover the catalyst. So next time you see a polymeric material, you should remember that there is a little bit of titanium or a little bit of zirconium sticking inside there somewhere. But the probability of finding it is very small. 1980s, this is in 1955. It started in 1955. The race, or just like Wilkinson and Fisher, the race to discover better and more efficient catalysts started in 1955. It started with the nickel effect. And then went on. But in 1980s, what transpired was a discovery of Brindsinger and another gentleman. I forget the name now. I'll come to that. They discovered metallocene catalysts. Okay, they discovered metallocene catalysts, and these were single site catalysts. And so now industrially also some single site catalysts are used. But in 1995, people started using, instead of using late transition metals, they started using early transition metals. sorry, exactly the other way about. In 1955, titanium and zirconium were used. This was early transition. And in 1995, late transition metals were used. Okay, so what is the big deal? The big deal is as follows. Early transition metals are extremely sensitive to other functional groups. You cannot have a ketone, you cannot have an alcohol or something in the monomer chain in order to make the polymer chain. So the polymerization will stop abruptly if you have any functional group on the monomer. So early transition metals are very sensitive. Whereas late transition metals, they are more rugged and allow for other functional groups. You have functional group tolerance. And of course, these are simply early transition metals, but single site. So the specificity is very good. Okay, we will, in the remaining time, we will just go through some of these discoveries and some of these improvements. To start with, let me say Ziegler only did polyethylene synthesis. Polyethylene synthesis is itself as remarkable because to get high molecular weight polymerization, the first one was developed by ICI, which is Imperial Chemical Industries, and that was a remarkable discovery, but they used dioxygen in order to generate radical polymerization of polyethylene under high pressures, very high pressures. Ziegler showed that you could do it with transition metals very efficiently, and Natta, the Italian scientist, used polypropylene, made polypropylene, and he made stereoregular polypropylene synthesis. All of these have got very special properties, and that is why in 1963 they were jointly awarded the Nobel Prize. There are a lot of advantages and disadvantages of the Ziegler-Natta system, and now you may not realize it, but everything, just about everything that we use in our everyday life is some sort of polymer or other. So we use a large amount. Like I said, radical polymerization requires very high pressures and very high temperatures. So if you use more than, if you go beyond this temperature, you start stop the polymerization process. And so there is an optimum temperature. You just cannot increase the temperature ad infinitum. But pressure is something that doesn't affect. At these temperatures, in fact, the polymer itself dissolves in the in a liquid form of the ethylene or the propylene. So that makes the system easier to handle. You don't need to use a solvent, and that's a big, very big advantage as far as industries go. If you have to use a solvent, you have to clean up the solvent, you have to dispose of the spent solvent, environmental issues are there. So this was a major discovery. And the molecular weight has to be significantly high in order to achieve the density, hardness, etc., etc. So if you want a particular melting point at which you can work the polymer, shape it into a particular shape, all these properties have to be carefully controlled. All these temperatures and pressures have to be carefully controlled. So since this is not a polymer class, so we won't worry about it, but we'll just make a note of the fact that these are critical parameters. When it comes to polypropylene, you have one more complication, and that is the arrangement of the methyl groups. The methyl groups, if they are happening or they are appearing on the same side of the polymer chain, then they are supposed to be isotactic. This is the same side, this is isotactic. If they are on the same side, since the carbon is tetrahedral, this carbon is going to have two hydrogens. Now, at the risk of making this, let's keep this invisible now. So there are two hydrogens, and these two hydrogens, one hydrogen is going to face. Just a moment. I need to have, yeah. So, so this hydrogen and this hydrogen will be facing different environments, will be encountering different environments. So isotactic polymers can be distinguished from the syndiotactic polymers because the syndiotactic polymers will have exactly the same environment. Each hydrogen will have one methyl and one hydrogen on the same side. So the syndiotactic is easy to distinguish using NMR. In fact, if you talk to polymer chemists, they use what is called a pentad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they need to look at the NMR of a pentad of carbons in order to distinguish between isotactic, syndiotactic, and atactic is random. Atactic is random polymerization. So all of these can be carefully distinguished. Atactic is random polymerization. Okay. So there can also be stereo block polymers where you have sections of the polymers where it is isotactic. That is also possible. So you have different types of polymers that can be generated, and each one of them has their own property. Natta was the one who recognized the importance of this, and he generated the polypropylene, which was isotactic. And the popular mechanism that is given for the generation of isotactic polymers is the same type of an insertion, migratory insertion of an alkyl group onto an olefin. But now, because you have a substituent, you have to do it in a head to tail fashion. If you consider the propylene molecule, this can be considered as the head, and this is the head and this is the tail. So that's what I mean by head to tail polymerization. If you want to have regular polymerization, you need to have head to tail polymerization. So let's take a look at this reaction. The stereo regularity is usually explained as follows. Now these figures are drawn by me and not terribly good, but what I want to indicate is that the orientation of the polymer chain, this is the growing polymer chain, this is the polymer chain, and this is the incoming monomer. The orientation of these two groups should be such that they are avoiding each other. So the large groups are avoiding each other. Okay. So when they are doing that, the insertion happens by movement of the alkyl group onto the alkene. And in order for this migration to happen, you should remember that the alkene has to move a little bit to slip away from the eta 2 position. So let me exaggerate that by writing it like this. So this is the large R group with a growing polymer chain. So this has to move a little bit along this axis so that you end up with the formation of this species. So that you end up with formation of species. This incoming alkene will now coordinate to the other face of the titanium. Actually, the other face is not a good thing to say, the adjacent site of the titanium, and that will give you a second intermediate. Now, you might be wondering why this chlorine has got this dangling bond here. This whole thing is TiCl3 or TiCl3 supported on a magnesium surface, magnesium chloride surface. So that's the one which generates the active sites. So that's why this bond is sitting here. Okay, to tell you that this is a surface. So if I bring the methyl in a fashion that brings the methyl group towards the large alkyl chain, that would be unfavorable. And so the best way to do it is to orient the methyl always away from the polymer chain. And so you end up with, since it's always away, you always end up with the methyl group on one side of this polymer chain which is growing. And that is why you have isotactic. Isotactic polymerization. So this is one explanation that is given, and there are weak interactions between the CH, the beta CH group and the vacant site, which kind of protects the titanium from other reactions before the incoming alkene comes in. But the rates of these reactions are phenomenal. They occur several thousand times, almost 1,000 times a second. So they are incredibly fast, these reactions. The moment an alkene coordinates, a simple movement of the alkene, the sliding of this alkene along this axis is enough to cause the migration to happen. And so it is almost like a shuttle. If you have not seen a sewing machine, you should watch how it operates, and that's a very good description of how the alkene molecules are stitched together to form a long polymer chain. Okay, so it's extremely fast, and they go at several thousand times a second. Now I'm coming to this example, which is a late transition metal. Late transition metal, which does the same polymerization, but the polymerization is such that if you have, it is dependent on these groups. Notice how a very small change in the R group which is present, R and R dash are different, and depending on what R group is present, you can either have oligomers C10 to C20, or you can have high molecular weight HDPE polymers. MOW is the common factor, but then the substituent on the nitrogen, which is coordinated to the iron, seems to be capable of doing this big difference. So if you remember, this is the same ligand that was used by Schirik, Paul Schirik, who is currently the editor of Organometallics. He used this ligand to dimerize butenes. And this was discussed in a class in which we talked about oxidative coupling. Okay, so that involves radicals. that reaction appears to involve radicals, and so this reaction is also fairly complicated, but the net result of having ethylene and this late transition metal catalyst seems to be simple polymerization reaction or oligomerization reaction, depending on the size of the R group. This paper, which I think I have downloaded and kept this, I will give you the references for these papers. This paper again suggests that you have a simple migratory insertion reaction as a chain growth step, but you can stop the chain growth and have beta hydrogen elimination, because the beta hydrogen elimination can result in dissociation of the alkene and stopping of the chain growth. So activation of these this species. Let me go to the next slide. Yeah, I'll come back to that in a minute. If you have the, okay, let me start here only. Okay, if I have the trimethyl aluminum and the dichloride, I should have written the FeClCl. I thought I had it in the next slide, but I don't seem to have it. So you have nitrogen, nitrogen, nitrogen coordinated FeCl. If I treat it with MAO, I can generate a species in which in which I have Fe, Me, and generation of Fe0. Okay, so I can end up with Fe0. I can also have a situation where I can do hydrogen abstraction and I generate FeH as an intermediate species, which can initiate the polymerization process, or FeMe as an intermediate which can initiate the polymerization process. So once it is initiated, the polymer chain can, or the alkyl chain can be generated from ethylene, and then the growth of the polymer chain, can proceed, resulting in the formation of very large polymers. Termination happens with beta hydride elimination, and that is what is indicated here. Let me see. Yeah, this is beta hydrogen elimination can happen with from this step, beta hydrogen elimination. This is beta hydrogen elimination. Then it generates this, and once this is generated, this binds more or less strong, less efficient binding than ethylene. So you can keep introducing this, can now become an ethyl group, FeCH3CH2, and then it can start chain growth. So you can use several methods by which you can either generate an FeH or FeMe and start off this chain growth in order to generate polymers. So so I don't think I have, I want to add anything. This is a whole picture that is given in this slide. Let me say that there are so many variations of this with late transition metals. Many of them have nitrogen ligands, common factor. Late transition metals. And the other factor is the presence of MAO and large anions. Even the starting material, if it is cationic in species, cationic species is there, large anions have to be used. If you use halides and other things, you will contaminate the catalyst and will reduce the efficiency. But of course, if you use a large amount of MAO, you end up removing that from the catalytically active site. So you use Br, then you have to use a large amount of MAO to remove the Br from the catalytically active site. But you can use a large anion and you can start off with the methyl. That's why I said that you can start with the iron and dimethyl group. If it is there, then it can get reduced to form the nickel active species of the late transition metal. So polydiamine ligands are common and popular, and as I said, they have some complications. They can cooperate in the catalyst. It's not just the metal, it's also the ligand which is playing a part. Some of these catalysts, so palladium is also a late transition metal, and some of these catalysts have the ability to tolerate functional groups, and what you see here is the ability to translate an ester group. You can't do this with early transition metals, they will poison the catalyst, but with late transition metals it can be tolerated. This results in the formation of functionalized polymers. What is the specialty? Specialty is that the moment you have a functional group, you can have specialty polymers, and you can have degradation of the polymers, which is another important factor. If I want to generate a polymer which can be biodegraded, then I need a functional group. So the ability to generate functionalized polymers is important. Okay, so like I said, having a carbon monoxide at regular intervals is done by this palladium catalyst, and this molecule, for example, is a thermoplastic polymer. So let me stop here by saying that this is early and late transition metals are things which are very much in vogue. I will just show you, I will share another slide which will show you how research is being conducted in this area. So this is a paper which has come out just recently, chromium catalyzed ethylene trimerization and tetramerization. This is again chromium. I think I have more chromium and nickel here because that's what I was looking at just recently. So you have nickel catalyzed. This is again a recent paper where they have, I will put this paper up because it is late transition metal catalyst for oligomerization and polymerization using nickel. Okay, so I'll stop here and we can have some time for, I have one more topic that I definitely want to cover. So Friday I will have this lecture on that topic, and then I will stop these lectures. We can, you need to sign up with Let me remind you again, send a mail to Arpita and sign up for a time so that we can have a one-on-one discussion, not one-on-one, one-on-two discussion, because both Arpita and myself will be there. We will conduct a Viva for you in on the topic that you have chosen for study, so that you have already read the paper. Okay, any questions? Okay, otherwise I'll stop here. This is